First question being, what is the answer to inflation? Meaning, should we lower government spending or should we tax more? And tax who? And how do we address inflation and why?
Okay, thank you. Good question. I think that is a top question on everybody's mind right now. And the first thing I'd like to do is say I think there are several false sound bites out there about what's causing inflation. Two of the false sound bites I have heard recently are that number one, the inflation is caused exclusively by excessive government spending, and specifically the ARPA bill from last year. That couldn't be any further from the truth. The inflation really was started with supply chain issues and accentuated by oil price hikes as a result of the Ukraine war. And there are several things that we can do about some of those things, particularly in the oil question. Another false soundbite is that slowing down drilling on public lands is another major cause for the inflation in oil prices. That is also a complete false flag. And only about 10% of the oil produced in the United States comes from federal lands. And there are sufficient unused leases on federal lands to last the drilling industry through 2030 at the present rate of drilling. Drilling has slowed down dramatically during COVID. It's picked up. It's back almost to the point where it was in 2019. The real thing that people want to get an answer for, though, is what answers do we have for inflation? And I think there are two general categories, things that we can do about inflation. One is mitigating the consequences for the general public. What prices have been going up and what can we do about them? I think one of the issues that is on everybody's mind here in Utah is the price of housing. Affordable housing is an incredible burden, particularly on folks that are in about the lower half of the earning scale in Utah. And there are things we can do that will improve the production and the cost of affordable housing. One of the main issues in producing housing is the lack of workforce. I've been involved in developing affordable housing, first with Habitat for Humanity for 6 years, and then observing it on the Summit County Council as we have developed affordable housing sites. And in talking to the nonprofit developers we have working for us, some of the biggest problems they have is lack of labor, continual problems with getting subcontractors to come onto the site. What can we do about that? Number one, we can do more training in the building trades. And we have to support that on a local level. Get the local community colleges to do more building trades training. And the local labor unions have terrific training programs in that regard. The other thing we can do is expand the workforce. And we have an immigration situation in the United States where there are millions of people, at least hundreds of thousands of people, who are qualified to, in the building trades, who would like to come to work here, but we have roadblocks within our immigration system. So we need to have comprehensive immigration reform that will take the portion of our workforce that is, working under the table on a cash basis, get them actively in the workforce environment, and bring more people in who are willing to work for us here in the United States. They could be on permanent work assignments, or we can even have temporary work visas. That's one of the things we can do for affordable housing. Another thing we can do is our significant federal efforts that aid affordable housing in the low income tax credit regime. It's a good program. It provides federal funds for creating affordable housing, but it's extremely bureaucratic. We need to work some of the bureaucracy out of that program. And I would even advocate creating programs for affordable housing that created block grants for communities that have plans to create affordable housing and have shown that they can meet goals in creating affordable housing in their communities. Second issue for mitigation, prescription drugs. An incredible problem, particularly for the senior citizen community, but for anybody who has health problems. we need to be able to negotiate between Medicare and the pharmaceutical companies. And once we do that, expand Medicare into a regime outside the current range that it currently serves in the over 65 population. When Obamacare was first proposed back in 2010, I guess it was, there was consideration of something called the public option, where you could buy into a public option such as Medicare. So negotiating prescription drug prices and bringing in the public option to lower healthcare costs. I was speaking to a woman down in Provo a couple of days ago. Young woman working in one of the shops there, has 2 kids. She can't afford to get health insurance for them right now. That is something that our society should not allow. Another way to expand the workforce and to help people that are in the lower income end of things is creating more childcare, put more women in the workforce. Right now, a woman with a child or 2 at home can't afford to go into workforce unless they're getting a very good salary, because childcare is so expensive. Another thing we can do is cut tariffs. Trump put in a bunch of tariffs in 2018, and tariffs are just a tax on the local population to protect American industries. Whether or not those were justified or not is questionable. There's a lot of controversy about those particular tariffs, but even if some of them were, the alternative option there is to provide subsidies for the American companies that might be disadvantaged by those foreign industries. Whole different category of things we can do to fight inflation is on the macroeconomic area. And in a sense, the immigration reform I talked about is one thing that also works in the macroeconomic area, expanding the workforce. Another thing is control of monopolies, particularly in Utah, where we have a lot of ranchers in the state. And there are only 4 major meatpacking and slaughterhouse companies in the United States. Several of them are foreign owned. The consolidation of that industry has reduced the competition in those industries. We need to get local slaughterhouses and meatpacking companies to service our local ranchers. Other things we can do are shrinking demand. And that's where taxing or reducing spending comes in. What do we want to do? Do we want to reduce spending or tax more? And I think we can do both. There's certainly some areas within the federal government that might be worthy of cutting back on spending. I don't know what those are right now, but it certainly would behoove us to do a study to see where is the waste in federal government. We all know there's some there. And it's a matter of opinion which programs are waste. But unfortunately, what most Americans want from our federal government is free stuff. And Congress provides free stuff. So we've got to decide which of that free stuff can we do without. But we also have to be able to pay for the services we want. And that's where taking money out of the economy will also help inflation by taxing the rich. For instance, repealing the Trump tax cuts that cost us at least $1 trillion on the higher wealth individuals. Say, for example, incomes over $1 million a year. So those are some of the immediate things we can do that I think will have some impact on inflation in the short to medium term. And there's one very important thing that we can do that will affect inflation on a longer term, and that is to insulate the U.S. from the global oil market by moving as fast as we can to electric vehicles, electrifying our homes, and producing renewable energy, which will give us both energy independence from the rest of the world and insulate us from the fluctuations in the world oil market. So those are my not so brief options for fighting inflation.